Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Friedman. I'm a data center technical solutions architect at Cisco. And you might be aware that recently Cisco has updated the user interface for Intersight. So I'm going to record this video and walk through a number of different features of Intersight so that you can be more familiar with the updated UI. Now, I'm not going to go into an extreme amount of detail on any configurations or features, primarily because this environment is part of our SRE lab. In other words, it's in production. So I'm not allowed to make any configurations or any changes in this environment for that reason, but this will help you get familiar with the new navigation. So to start off, we'll start kind of up here in the upper right corner. Here you've got your user profile, so you can come in here to your user settings and change to dark mode if you'd prefer. Since Intersight supports multiple different accounts or roles, you can also switch to a different account or a different role. Up here at the question mark, when you're brand new to Intersight or even just a new UI, you can click on this Meet Intersight, which I kind of like. It just gives you a very quick summary of where things are located. So help and alerts are obviously, this is the help that I was just clicking on, and then these are your alerts, which we'll talk about in a little bit. You've also got a search bar up here for finding specific resources in your environment. You've also got your service selector up here. We also call this the launcher, so that's going to be really important, and it's a key feature of the new version of the user interface. And then you've got my dashboard, which is one of the selections. There's actually multiple selections here under the launcher. One of those is my dashboard, which is a more comprehensive view than the default view. So what you're looking at in the background here is the dashboard or overview for Intersight Infrastructure Service, which is the service that's responsible for management of UCS and HyperFlex hardware. So my dashboard will give you an even more comprehensive view of your overall infrastructure, but each service basically has its own more myopic dashboard. Okay. Infrastructure service, we've already covered. That's for UCS and HyperFlex. We've got Cloud Orchestrator, which is for all your automation and orchestration purposes, and it's basically a replacement and consolidation of UCS Director. And then you've got System, which is where you'll set up all your settings. We're going to go through that coming up very shortly here. And then you've got Workload Optimizer, right, which is for optimizing performance, cost, and compliance of both your VMware-based, or I should say VM-based, because it's not just VMware. It's VMs that are either on-premise or in the public cloud, as well as containers that are on-premise or in the public cloud. So that's a great tool, and we'll go over that at a high level. Okay, so that's a nice quick summary. Not a whole lot. You can go to Help Center. This is our main website for Intersight, intersight.com/help. This is everything you could possibly want to know about Intersight. There's videos, there's PDF documentation, there's a very handy resource that I'll point you at is under Getting Started Licensing Requirements. This is a very commonly asked question, and if you scroll down, there's a table here that will show you the 3 paid-for license tiers: Essentials, Advantage, and Premier, and the different features that align to those different license tiers. So that's a very handy resource to know how to find quickly. All right, so back to the user interface here. It tells us to click on the service selector. So we can see Intersight Infrastructure Service, Intersight Cloud Orchestrator, Intersight Workload Optimizer. We can see my dashboard, which again is the more comprehensive view. It is not the same as the Infrastructure Services Overview dashboard that we're looking at here, that's specific to your compute. And then we have System, which is where we manage settings for access, permissions, licensing, and more. So we're going to go there now. This gives you some general information, your account details, your access details, what role you're currently in. This is the account that I'm currently logged in as, which I was mentioning is part of our SRE lab and why I can't make any changes. And then notifications that you may want to sign up for. You can add notification rules to be alerted to any warnings that come in, and it's really referring to these alerts up here. Anything that's critical, warning, or info, you can go ahead and receive an email on that. And then from an authentication perspective, We do support single sign-on. We also, that's for connecting up to your own organization's domain and using your domain accounts to authenticate. But we also support authentication using just your plain old CCO account, different domain names that you may be supporting for authentication. And then here under Cisco ID, let's see here, IP address or IP access management. So this allows you to limit which systems can actually talk to Intersight, I believe. Enable IP access management to restrict access to Intersight portal only to trusted users. Security and privacy. Configure. Tech support bundle collection allow. So if you're familiar with the concept of connected TAC, what is TAC allowed to do without your explicit permission? Tunneled KVM launch is disallowed. Tunneled KVM configuration is disallowed. These are also licensable features, so it could be that they're disallowed because they're not licensed. Now, from a user's groups and roles perspective, this follows the typical role-based access control type setup that you're familiar with in many different IT systems. Organizations is really Intersight's concept of multi-tenancy, so you can set up multiple organizations, tie login accounts to those different organizations, and then within each organization set up your users, groups, or roles. And then down here, if you're interested in using the API, this is where you will generate an API key for use in your, let's say, Python scripts. If you want to use Intersight SDK to provision resources in Intersight, you'll need an API key in order to authenticate and run your scripts against Intersight. We also have OAuth 2 tokens and webhook capability. So that kind of quickly covers the settings, which is up here at the top. We also obviously have licensing, so this is going to be one of the first places that you come in when you first log into Intersight for the very first time. You can start a trial. I can't remember if the trial is 30 or 60 days. It looks like expiring soon in 30 to 59 days. So it looks like there's a trial for maybe 60 days, and that's a full feature as if you were Premier licensed trial. Okay, and then you can also add any licenses that you have here, sync up to your smart licensing portal, and so on. Okay, so this is where you handle all your licensing. Sessions just shows currently logged in users. Audit logs shows any activity in the system. Tech support bundles, you can kick off a process to basically add a tech support bundle, and this will be accessible by TAC based on the settings that we saw just a moment ago. Software repository is where you can upload your firmware and operating system images. And then targets is really important. So in Intersight, since we're a SaaS-based offering, it's one of our deployment modes. We also offer the CVA and PVA deployment modes, connected or private virtual appliances that you can run on-prem. But in the SaaS world, right, this is what provides us the unlimited scalability, because we scale our environment inside of AWS as needed to support all customers as you add additional targets that you're managing to the system. So here, you'll click on Claim a New Target, and there's lots of different targets that you can claim. And so over here on the left, we've kind of got those categorized, or you can look at all of them here. What I'll kind of do is highlight the most common stuff, right? So obviously we have compute and fabric, which refers to UCS, and we can see that we can claim standalone servers, we can claim UCSM managed or UMM managed mode. So these are your traditional UCS domains that we've been supporting for the last 10 or so years, up to let's say up to and including the 6454 FIs. Here you've got the UCS domain Intersight managed mode, or IMM, which also began on the 6454 and is supported on the most recent and all future Fabric interconnects. So this is how you would claim your UCS hardware. For hyperconverged, you can attach to your HyperFlex clusters. For network, you can attach to your APIC or Nexus switches or DCNM and DFC. For storage, if we come down here to storage, You can claim your different storage targets, so things like NetApp or Pure or Hitachi Storage. And then for hypervisor, you can claim VMware vCenter or Hyper-V. So all of that being said, right, Intersight Infrastructure Service is going to allow you to configure and operationally manage and monitor all of your Cisco compute, UCS, and HyperFlex. So from the perspective of storage and hypervisor and network, these are really more allowing you to get a more comprehensive view of your infrastructure, but this is not a replacement for the configuration portal, native configuration portal, let's say for your Pure storage array. You're still going to use Pure native management tools to configure your storage array, but you can see capacity all from one dashboard. So that's kind of a nice feature, and we'll see a little bit more of that in the overall navigation. So we're going to switch away from system and let's just go to dashboard. This is the main dashboard, and as you can see here, based on the different types of resources that you can target, you can have a dashboard for storage, which will show your storage version, the software version, I believe, that's running on your storage array, and then you can see capacity utilization for your array and capacity utilization for your volumes. Here on the Fabric Interconnect tab, this is essentially the same thing as the main dashboard on your infrastructure service, and you can see, basically overall health of your entire compute infrastructure. Here you've got servers. So this is specific to your Fabric Interconnects and different domains that you're running. These are all of the servers running within those domains. So I believe this would include UCS and HyperFlex. I'm not positive about that. Oh, just kidding. These are your UCS servers. Here you've got your HyperFlex clusters. And here you've got Workload Optimizer. And so this dashboard is customizable. So you can click on the plus sign here. You can create your own dashboard, name it how you want. And there's all kinds of different, basically, widgets that you can add in here. So maybe under servers, let's see here, device coverage, contract coverage, right? That's an important feature. We always want to make sure that our infrastructure is covered by support contract. That allows us to call in for TAC cases and receive the latest software updates and so on. So we can go ahead and say select to add that widget to our dashboard. And let's see here, source, servers, chassis, Fabric Interconnects. Let's include all of that in here and say add widget. Okay, and so now you can see that widget was added to the dashboard. We can see any devices that are not covered, those that are expiring soon, and those that are covered or currently active. So the same basic workflow can be used to add any of these different widgets to your dashboard to provide whatever information you want to show on that particular dashboard. So you could customize this to a particular job role, skill set, system access, etc. And then, of course, with RBAC, that determines who has access to what throughout the entire system. You can clone these dashboards and modify them. You can delete them. You can rename them. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that here. That's the one change I will make in this environment. Since it's production, it doesn't really hurt to create a read-only dashboard. Okay, so let's go into infrastructure service and kind of try and cover this top to bottom. Actually, before we dive into that, let's go back up into this upper corner. So here you can kind of see there's three icons. There's this bell, there's this red icon, there's this yellow icon, and all of them, when you mouse over them, will say alarms. And so what this is these are filters. So if you click on the red, you'll see the most critical alarms. If you click on the yellow, you will see the warnings. And if you just click on the overall bell, which sort of surrounds this whole thing, you can kind of see the highlight. It'll open this drawer and it'll show you all of the filters. All of the warnings. So you can see critical and warning and info, etc. So in terms of, let's see here, let's do 50 items per page. We can see that 14 items were found. You can acknowledge or acknowledge alarm, right? If you're working on it, that'll show up over here in the acknowledged. But basically, you can kind of get an overall sense of what's happening on your system in terms of deviation from your normal baseline. Here you have your advisories. So these are things like security advisories and field notices, product end-of-life advisories, and obviously you can do the same thing here. You can basically, acknowledge an advisory to show that you're aware of it. So it's important to keep your system up to date. Since if you're running the SaaS version of Intersight, we're taking care of that for you, but there may be recommendations for the systems that you're managing to keep those up to date. And so you can learn about those advisories and field notices and end-of-life notices here, right? End-of-life can be really helpful for planning your future. End-of-life means we'll continue to support it for up to 5 years. But after that, you're kind of on your own. So this will kind of indicate to you when you need to undertake a hardware or software refresh. Okay. This right here is sort of like, if you're familiar with VMware vSphere, the HTML UI, whenever you do actions inside of VMware, like turn on a virtual machine or vMotion it, or add a data store or something like that, you always see in the lower portion of the browser, there's this pane that provides you a progress indicator as to the status of the actions that you're taking in the system. And that's exactly what this checkbox is. So you can see here, deploy Kubernetes, cluster, etc. Different actions that were taken, when they were taken, who initiated those actions, were they successful or did they fail? So you can see all of that activity here, and when there's something in progress, I believe there's kind of like your typical like sort of circular icon here, and then when the latest action is completed, it'll show up as a green check mark, but you can always click on it here to see the details like we're looking at now. Okay, so back over to infrastructure service. Again, this is what you're going to use to visualize all of your compute, right? And specifically to configure and to configure UCS and HyperFlex. So we'll start there. So under configuration for UCS and HyperFlex, we have the typical logical objects that we would expect, right? We have pools that support your IP, MAC, UUID, worldwide node name, worldwide port name, IQN, pools that you would need. Under policies, we have things like your BIOS policies. So if we click Create Policy up here, you can see your BIOS policy, your boot order policy, your iSCSI adapter policies, basically all of the policies that are supported by these different types of systems. You would come in and configure those here. And then the idea, right, is that you would combine those policies into templates for different categories or types of systems, depending on your needs. So you can create a profile, and then it'll ask you what your compute configuration should be and the policies that you want to use inside of this template to determine that configuration. Same for management, storage, and network configuration. And then you would essentially clone those templates into what we used to call service profiles, but we're now calling server profiles. So these are server profile templates. Now what you'll notice when you go to the Profiles tab is that you have server profiles up here for UCS, but we also have all these other tabs now. So this is the, where Intersight has some additional capabilities above and beyond UCSM, including HyperFlex. So over here on the left, we can build out HyperFlex cluster profiles. So if you click here to create a profile, you can basically go through a wizard that will help you build out an entire HyperFlex cluster. And provided that you've defined a HyperFlex cluster as a target in the system already, you can then apply this profile to that target in order to configure the entire cluster via automation. So, okay, we're familiar with UCS server profiles. You would clone your server profile templates to a number of server profiles, and then you would bind those to the different blades, typically, right, in your B series or now X series. Remember, Intersight is required for X series management, so you would still be leveraging server profiles for that. In addition to that, we also have UCS domain profiles, which is new. And what this allows you to do is use the same concept of having a logical construct that represents your entire server configuration that you then apply to a piece of hardware, except now we're extending that same concept to your fabric interconnects. So you can configure a UCS domain profile, which represents a pair of fabric interconnects and therefore a UCS domain before you even have the hardware. When the hardware comes in, you can then apply that configuration to the hardware. So you can essentially configure your entirely new UCS domain in a matter of minutes. And this is really the where we like to say in Intersight, we're combining multiple different forms of management, right? So in the past, we had the C-Series standalone integrated management controller, or SIMC. We had UCS Manager running on our Fabric Interconnects. We had UCS Central for multi-domain management, and we had UCS Director. So we're combining all of that here. In fact, server profiles can even be used now for C-Series. So when you establish a C-Series server as a target, you can import that configuration from that server into a server profile that is now housed in Intersight. And then you can make modifications to that configuration and push it right back onto C-Series, which wasn't, even though you could manage C-Series, we didn't have server profiles for them, right? Those configurations were managed were managed locally, I believe. So we can handle your C-Series server profiles, your B-Series and X-Series server profiles, which covers all of the IMC and UCSM functionality. Domain profiles covers your UCS Central functionality, and up here, Cloud Orchestrator handles your UCS Director functionality. So all of that has now been consolidated inside of Intersight. And then we also have chassis profiles. Over here on the right, you see Kubernetes cluster profiles. This was part of Intersight Kubernetes service, which has been announced as end of life. So it'll be supported for a number of years, but we're not going to cover it in this video because essentially Cisco is moving away from this direction. Kubernetes service was Cisco's attempt at providing container platform management. So we weren't, other than on a HyperFlex cluster, we weren't actually provisioning Kubernetes clusters, but you could attach to existing Kubernetes clusters in your public clouds and then manage the lifecycle of those clusters. But again, it was a crowded space. It wasn't something that our customers were looking or asking us to do. So Cisco has refocused on our core, I guess you could say, go-to-market and offerings where our customers are asking for more functionality, and that's these here: Intersight Infrastructure Service, Cloud Orchestrator, Workload Optimizer, and coming soon, right? You can literally, these are different services that run on top of the Intersight platform. And so a new service is coming called Nexus Cloud, which you've probably heard about. And so there will be a service launcher here for Nexus Cloud that will get you access to all of that functionality, provided you're licensed to do so. Okay, so that covered the configuration of your compute, and then you want to operate it, right? So if we kind of like, we can hide all the configure, and then right here under this menu, this is all operate. So I like to start kind of from the top down. Your HyperFlex clusters, you can view all of that information here. What is the health of your cluster, connection status, hypervisor types. IWE was, again, the underlying hypervisor for Intersight Kubernetes service, which is why you're seeing that here. Your capacity runway in terms of your storage, average utilization, average memory utilization, what software versions you're running, what HyperFlex HXDP version are you running, and so on, right? So you can get a lot of information all from one area. You can also handle backups from here. And then moving away from HyperFlex and going into UCS, we obviously have your Fabric Interconnect status, where you can see all the similar type information here. And then obviously, if you click into a Fabric Interconnect, you'll get more detail. Okay, so here on the left, you'll see the serial number, the management IP, the software version that you're running. In the middle, you're going to see kind of a front and rear view of what that specific hardware version looks like. You can tell if ports are up and running, whether they have alarms on them right here. And then over on the right, you'll see events. So you'll see alarms and advisories. And what I meant to say about these things earlier, right, is that these are alarms and advisories that are specific to the infrastructure that you're running. So a lot of times you might get a field notice about a particular problem. And your first question is, okay, well, does this affect me? And if so, where, so I can go fix it? And that's the type of information that Intersight is going to be able to specifically direct you to because it's context aware, right? So these events, alarms, and advisories over here on the right are specific to this Fabric Interconnect, whereas these events and advisories are more general and cover all of the infrastructure that is under management by infrastructure service. Okay, so if we click on inventory, we can see different ports, fan modules, power supply units, your local storage of your Fabric Interconnects. And then for the different ports, we can see which ones are Ethernet, fiber channel, port channels, or fiber channel port channels. And then obviously you've got actions up here, things that you can take like cross-launching to UCS Manager. You can launch to a command line interface. You can open a TAC case. You can upgrade firmware on these Fabric Interconnects or collect tech support bundles, all of the basic functionality that you would expect. And then connections will show how the Fabric Interconnects are connected to different servers and chassis. Okay, and then here you've got a chassis view, which I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on, just know that it's here. And then of course, servers, you're probably going to be spending a lot of time here. So, server health, which servers are powered on, which ones are powered off, hardware compatibility list status. This is an important one to keep up after, and we'll dig into that here in just a minute. Different models of server hardware that you may be running in your environment, your contract status, profile status. So this is when you have a server profile that may not be attached to a server, or a server that may not have a profile attached to it, and then requests in the last 24 hours. Now, all of these on any of the screens that we've looked at are clickable filters. So if I want to see all of the machines that are currently powered off, all I have to do is click here on off, and it shows up here that that filter has been applied. And we can see here this server is powered off and these guys have no connection. If you want to get rid of a filter, you can click on X and we'll go back to the full view. And then you can obviously apply more than one filter. So we can say, show us all of the powered on systems that are currently have critical health alarms. Okay, and it'll drill down and show you just those systems. So a nice way to quickly find the information that you're looking for. So here, if we pick on the C220 and drill into him, you'll kind of see what a more detailed server view looks like. Again, just like the Fabric Interconnects, on the General tab, you see the details, the management IP, the serial number, the contract coverage status, whether or not that's this device is covered. Based on that coverage, you can always come up here and open a TAC case if you needed to for this particular device. And then you get all of the things that you would expect for a typical server, right? You've got your operational tasks like power cycling, system management, so KVM. Actually, you can launch your IMC or your KVM or tunneled KVM from here. You open a TAC case, set your licensing tier, collect your tech support bundles. So again, all of the things that you would need essentially to manage this server. If we click on inventory, you'll see more of the guts of the server itself. This is all read-only information, so I'm not going to click on each one of these. If we click on the UCS server profile, we can see the server profile that's assigned to this server. Currently for the C220, there isn't, and I think that's because this is part of a HyperFlex cluster. Here you can see the hardware compatibility list, which is a really great feature. This is actually probably one of my favorite features in UCS or infrastructure service, and that's because it can often be challenging to understand what server hardware is compatible with what software version and what peripherals you have installed inside that server. So things like your NIC adapters. And so this is going to tell you at each layer, right? Here's your server model. here's the CPU version that you're running, here's the server firmware version that you're running. All of this is compatible, right? This was validated, and it's to be expected, or it's going to provide you recommendations. Here under server software compliance, we've got ESXi and version 6503, and that's obviously that software is validated and compatible with the hardware. And then here under step 3, we've got adapters, right? And so down here we can see the firmware version and the driver version that you're currently running, and all of these have been validated. So these versions are compatible with the server software and the server hardware. Now, if you were to have some incompatibilities here, you could always click on Get Recommended Drivers. And so what this is going to show you is your current driver version that you're running. So here we can see on this MLOM, we're running 1.6.0.50, but it's actually saying there's an updated driver recommendation for this guy, and here's the version of that. So you can click here to download a driver ISO that'll basically contain all these drivers so that you can then go in and install them. And you can also check, right, recommended drivers even for different versions of ESX. So maybe you're planning an upgrade to ESXi 7, you can click here. Cannot find recommended drivers because selected OS version is not listed in the hardware compatibility list. I'm not sure why that is, but I don't think it's super relevant for the demo. Okay, and then statistics, power state, you can look at a range of time, whether the system was on or off, etc. Okay, now here under virtualization, this is when you set up a target pointed at vSphere. So you can get an entire visualization of your entire vSphere or Hyper-V environment. You can see all of your virtual machines, logical data centers, clusters, individual hosts, your virtual machine templates, your data stores, and your data store clusters. Just everything that you would basically see within vCenter. And then obviously you have some limited ability to do operational tasks on this VMware, so that would, or on this virtual machine, and those tasks are located here. So you can start, stop, restart, reset, or launch a VM console to this particular virtual machine. So we'll go ahead and click on VM console, and it should pull that up here in the browser. Okay, and then for that particular virtual machine, what does the local storage look like? What does the networking look like? Do I have any snapshots? I don't know if you can take snapshots in here or not. Looks like not. Okay, so this will give you visibility to all of your virtual machines, and keep in mind that these virtual machines can be running on your different on-prem hypervisors, so VMware or Microsoft Hyper-V, and also in the public cloud. So you'll see virtual machines here if you've set up a target, which I didn't actually show. So let's go show that real quick. If I go to System, Targets, and create a new target, I neglected to show Cloud. So you can click here on Cloud, and you can set up targets that are in Amazon, Azure, or Google Cloud platform, and essentially these are targeting different accounts. So you may have to set up multiple targets pointed at different accounts in your Amazon Web Services, but each account will expose all of its infrastructure to Intersight. And so coming back to your infrastructure service, any kind of VMs that you've deployed in those public clouds will also show up here. Okay, Kubernetes, again, this is related to Intersight Kubernetes service, so we're not going to go through that. And integrated systems is really with regards to converged infrastructure. So if we click on Create Integrated System, you can see here we can do FlexPod. I'm assuming that FlashStack and vBlock may make their way into the integrated system section here. Okay, so that really covers pretty much everything in the infrastructure service. Now we'll have a quick look at Workload Optimizer. So again, Workload Optimizer is this real-time decision engine that's looking at all of your workload, right? Workload meaning your virtual machines or your containers, and those can either be on-prem or in the public cloud. And so when you set up your targets, the more targets that you define inside of Intersight, the more data sources Intersight Workload Optimizer has to feed on. And so based on those data sources, it links all of the logical objects that you're managing together. So here you can see this is talking about a region and a zone and a public cloud. So this is your public cloud infrastructure. And here you've got an on-prem data center. And you can see how in the data center, for example, you've got a number of hosts, and you have a virtual data center. So you're running a hypervisor like VMware, and then you've got virtual machines, and the host is tied to storage, which is running on an array. And inside your storage device, you've got a volume, and so on, right? You can see how all of this is related to your fabric interconnects and your network and your internet. You can see how all of your containers may be running, here you've got like a container pod that's running maybe on a virtual machine, indicating that you may be running Intersight, what am I trying to say? You may be running Kubernetes on top of a virtual machine, and then you have containers, right, that are running in those pods and application components all the way up to your business app. So a pretty comprehensive view of dependencies in your public clouds or in your on-prem data centers. And each one of these icons has a number inside of it, so you can kind of see, let's say, for example, the number of virtual machines you're running is 215, and if you click on that, then over here in the right pane, it'll provide a view that's specific to those virtual machines. You also want to notice the color coding, right? So anything that's green, I guess, let me close this out real quick, see if I can get some numbers if I mouse over. So you can see 45% are green, which means there's no pending actions or recommendations coming from Workload Optimizer. 55% have minor actions, and less than 1% have critical risks. Okay, so obviously in terms of priority, you want to pay attention to red before yellow, and green is in good standing already. So I mentioned this is a real-time decision engine, and so what it's doing is it's analyzing all of the metrics that are collected from each of these independent systems and correlating them and understanding how they're all impacting each other. And it's doing this on a continual basis. And so the goal of Workload Optimizer in order of priority is to ensure top performance of your workloads, because that is directly tied to your end user experience. The second thing that it's going to try and do is optimize your cost, right? So first performance, then cost, while also adhering to any business policies or compliance regulatory requirements that you have. Okay, so performance, cost, and compliance. Those are the three goals of Workload Optimizer. And so it's going to make recommendations to you about things that you should do in order to achieve that optimization. So what's often said about Workload Optimizer is that you pay for Workload Optimizer up front, but ultimately Workload Optimizer pays for itself over the long haul based on the cost savings that it's able to uncover as it's optimizing your environment. So you're kind of killing multiple birds with one stone. Okay, so you can click on virtual machines, and then you will see here on the Actions tab any recommended actions. And so we said less than 1% had critical actions. Those are sorted and showing up here at the top. And so it says, move this virtual machine, let's see, this is from node 1 to node 4. So what that means is maybe this virtual machine is demanding too many resources from node 1, and node 4 has more capacity to be able to handle that. This is going to improve the performance of the application running on that virtual machine. Here we see a scale virtual machine, which means that this one maybe doesn't have enough CPU or have enough RAM. Actually, it says right here, vCPU congestion. And this one was due to memory congestion. So here, node 1 didn't have enough memory to support the VM running there. So let's move it to node 4. He's got some memory capacity. And here we can see vCPU congestion on this virtual machine, meaning this virtual machine doesn't have enough virtual CPU assigned to it. So we want to scale this. And it says, what is the estimated investment in order to do this? So some things are investments, purchasing new VMs, new hosts, things like that. Other things are estimated savings, right? So here we can see scale virtual machine from X large to large. So what this is saying is that this virtual machine is actually over provisioned, right? the demand being placed on the virtual machine is less than what the hardware can provide. And so you may have provisioned a virtual machine in your public cloud to be a certain, quote, t-shirt size, in this case, extra large, which grants it, let's say, for example, 16 CPUs, but you're really running at like 40% capacity. And so it's saying you can downside this to a large, which would have 8 CPUs, and that's going to save you $55 a month. And that's not insignificant. And especially when you're running a really large scaled out environment, this is just a single virtual machine. So imagine if that were true across thousands of virtual machines that were the same. You can then multiply this by 1,000. We just saved you $5,500. Okay, so $55,000. Okay, so these are the list of actions, and something that you should understand, right, is this one is one that's geared towards performance. This one is geared towards efficiency, right? So efficiency is handled, I guess, a couple of different ways depending on whether your resources are running in your private cloud or in your public cloud. In the private cloud, you have already made the investment in hardware. It's a capital expenditure of money up front. And so what you're trying to do is make sure that all of the resources you've already purchased, you're getting the biggest bang for your buck out of them, right? So what you're essentially trying to do is make sure that you don't have hosts that are laying around doing no work, right? We want to move some workload there. We want to run them at a high capacity, maybe 80% of resources, but not so high that we're now constraining the application. So it's this whole balancing act that Workload Optimizer helps you figure out how to manage. Okay, and then efficiency or cost savings is totally different in the public cloud because depending on how you're consuming public cloud, if you're going pay as you go, there is no upfront capital expenditure. There's only pay for what you use. And so again, what we want to do there is make sure that we're efficiently paying for what we need rather than paying for, in this case, an over-provisioned VM. So it really is about outright cost savings in public cloud, whereas in private cloud, it's more about efficiency of hardware that you've already purchased. Now, all of the actions that are recommended by default in Workload Optimizer they're just recommendations, meaning we're not going to go and make any of these changes for you. You would have to come in here, select this one, and say, apply this selected recommendation in order to take any action. That can, of course, be automated. And one way that customers like to step into this is to set up groups of devices, let's say maybe in a lab, and then for the policies that are applied to that group of devices, let's go ahead and allow full automation. Whereas in production, we don't want to allow full automation. Maybe this is what it looks like at the outset of first purchasing Workload Optimizer. But as you grow more comfortable with the recommendations that Workload Optimizer is taking and the success of applying those recommendations to achieving your overall business goals and value, then you can go apply automation even to your production environment. And that's when things really kick into high gear and you start to see a lot of ROI on the investment that you've made. So just know, by default, we don't automate anything, but you can fully automate everything. Okay, so if we wanted, we could click on any one of these and I guess drill in and get more detail. So it'll tell you what's the status of your memory and your CPU, both before and after. So here's your current host, and since it's recommending moving to a destination host due to memory, let's see, this one is at 91% capacity, and it'll drop down to 87% capacity after you move the VM. This one is at 79%, and it'll ramp up to 81% capacity after you move the VM. So the VM's going to consume some memory. But overall, you can see, you're saving some memory capacity on the current host, and you're consuming some new capacity on the destination host. This is a better balancing of memory across your hosts in support of your overall workload, right? Okay. So this is the basic idea behind Workload Optimizer. And then this is the entire view of all your infrastructure. You can, of course, limit that to just on-prem or cloud. And then I'm not going to I will go into settings, okay? And so here is where you can set up the device groups that I was talking about a few minutes ago, as well as your policies. So if you were to, let's click on policies, two types of policies. You have placement policies about where you want to run workloads. So this could have to do with, let's say you have a device group and it contains 2 VMs, and you want to run these VMs in a HA type capacity, which means you don't want to run both VMs on the same host. So you can set up rules, sort of like anti-affinity rules in VMware, to make sure that doesn't happen. So that's an example of like a compliance rule. Or maybe you do want to run them on the same host because maybe you want to run them on a specific group of hosts that belong to your business unit, as opposed to another business unit who owns their own infrastructure. So you can set up all kinds of placement policies and then automation policies. So if we look at automation policies, let's click one. When we look at automation and orchestration, action constraints, I forget exactly where in here. It's been several months since I've poked around inside a workload optimizer, but it's in here where you would essentially make the change from this policy being a manually executed recommendation to a fully automated recommendation, or action execution on that recommendation. Okay, so just be kind of aware of where you can find that. All policies, any default policies, all of that is shown here. Dashboard, search, placement, plan. So plan is kind of the opposite, right? We have this recommendation engine under the hood that's analyzing all of the metrics on your existing workload. But what if you want to do something and you haven't done it yet, and you sort of want to understand what the future impact of those changes is going to look like? That's where you're going to use the plan feature. So here we can see some plans have been created to maybe propose migration to public cloud, or maybe you're planning to add a bunch of hosts to your VMware cluster, or maybe you're planning on rolling out a brand new business application that's going to consist of, let's say, 50 VMs, and you want to get an idea of what the impact of that is going to be if you roll that out onto your private cloud VMware cluster. So these are all examples of, future plans that you may have, and you can come in here, you can click on a new plan, and it gives you different types, right? So you want to optimize a container cluster or optimize cloud resources by VM reservations, which can potentially allow you to save money. Maybe you're planning a cloud migration like we saw over here, and there's different plans that you can do. Like I was saying, buy a new host, merge clusters, add VMs, all kinds of different hypothetical scenarios that you're going to run, and you're going to want to understand what's the cost savings, what's the performance impact before you take action. And then those are the types of things that you're going to want to run here. And of course, you can schedule those things, which reminds me that if we go back to scheduling, you can schedule, let's see, new schedule. You can apply policies with a schedule, right? So you can create a schedule for execution, and then under policies, if I say new automation policy, let's just say virtual machine. Then I believe under operational policy schedule, right? You can apply that schedule to this particular policy. So maybe you want to run an automation policy once an evening, or maybe you want to run a plan once a month, right? To sort of tip you off to when in the overall time span of running my workload does it become more advantageous for me to run these resources in the cloud versus on-prem, or vice versa. Okay, so that's a good overview of Workload Optimizer. Finally, we'll move into Cloud Orchestrator. So Cloud Orchestrator, again, it's a separate product from UCS Director, but the idea was to move the same similar type of functionality all into Intersight. And so there is a connector. I can't remember where to find that exactly, but there's a connector from Intersight Cloud Orchestrator to UCS Director. And what that allows you to do is keep your existing instance of UCS Director and run workflows off of that instance. So it's sort of like a handoff. And then that really happens when you build out a workflow in Intersight Cloud Orchestrator, is you make a call out to UCS Director like, hey, go run this workflow, and when you're done, hand off back to me and let me know what the results were. So the overall overall idea behind Cloud Orchestrator is to be a low-code drag and drop user interface for creating orchestrated workflows. And that just means a workflow is a series of tasks that you want to automate. And so if we click on My Workflows over here, these are workflows that you created. These are sample workflows that come with the system. These are obviously all workflows. And so if we create a workflow and you click on the designer here, this is where you get that low-code drag and drop user interface that I was just talking about. So up here on the left, you see the start of the workflow. Down here, you can see either success or failure of a particular task. And so here on the left, you see what I like to call is a multi-vendor task library. And you can see here executors for call outs to different technologies like Ansible or PowerShell, SSH commands, Web API. I believe you can even make call outs to your own code like Python, potentially Terraform. And then you see vendor specific actions. So things that you can do for Cisco WebEx, for your compute, for your UCS, you can add server policies to a profile. If we scroll down, Hyperflex, we've got networking actions that we can take on MDS, NXOS. Here you've got storage things that you can do I saw something in here for Hitachi volume. Pretty sure we've got NetApp. Yep, there's NetApp iGroup. Pretty sure Pure is in here as well. Pure Storage, Snapshot. Okay, so again, multi-vendor task library that allows you to build a workflow that handles tasks on multiple different types of systems in the order in which it makes sense. So if you're maybe building a new business application, maybe you want to build out some networking constructs on your ACI fabric, and then once those constructs are up, you want to tie in some storage. You want to bind that all together in your compute, and put a hypervisor on it, and build some VMs and so on. So you can orchestrate that entire process here. Mapping, I believe, has to do with, let's say you have a task. A task is like a function, if you're familiar with programming, right? And a function takes some input and delivers some output. So the idea behind mapping is taking the output of one task and using it as an input to the next task. And that has to do with your order of operations and dependencies of your tasks based on the workflow that you're building out. And then code, I think, shows you, this looks like JSON, but I'm not exactly sure what it is that we're seeing here. This must be sort of like the code for the overall orchestration of tasks that you're putting together in the designer, a JSON representation of how that all fits together. So anyway, that's the overall idea behind Cloud Orchestrator, is building out your own workflows across multiple different vendor solutions, right? So here under tasks, I think you can see the status of tasks. Let's see here. Remove storage pool, delete a pool by specifying the pool number. Last update 10 minutes ago. System defined, yes. Distribution by targets. So my tasks, system tasks, and all tasks. Let's click on system tasks. Okay, it doesn't look like there's any create membership. So I haven't made extensive use of Cloud Orchestrator myself since I'm in partner support. I don't really do this in a production environment. So it's hard to tell whether this is giving me a status of the tasks, which it looks like maybe it's not, but more so which tasks that exist in the system overall and how many of them are specific to these different categories, right? Or these different targets. So it's more like a read-only inventory view. And then what's under data types? Data types, email address. Okay, so these are like different fields that go into the different tasks. So maybe you need to create a new data type for a task that you're building out on your own. So of course, you don't have to just use the pre-existing multi-vendor task library, that's really just there as a convenience to you, the user, to be able to consume common operations on those different platforms, but you can also build out your own tasks. And so when you're doing that, you may need to create your own data types in order to support that. So hopefully that all makes sense. You can import workflows from another, I think, instance of Cloud Orchestrator, but again, not from UCS Director. That's why we have a connector to UCS Director. The systems are fundamentally different under the hood, and so they're incompatible, but having that connector will allow you to continue to leverage your investment in UCS Director and the workflows you've built there until such time as you're able to migrate those workflows into Cloud Orchestrator natively. So hopefully this provides a good overview of the UI as well as some of the functionality and key points of functionality within the system. I appreciate your time for watching. Please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video and if this was helpful. Take care and have a great day.